Battle plans have been approved for an increasingly likely offensive in Lebanon. That's the word from top army brass, who say that the army is ready and awaiting orders. More from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
Top Israeli generals have approved battle plans for a Lebanon offensive. According to the army, commanders' orders were given for the acceleration and readiness of the forces for a ground operation to potentially push Hezbollah beyond the Litani River. The head of the IDF's Northern Command, Major General Ori Gordon, and officers approved the Lebanon battle plans following a recent intensification of cross-border fighting with Hezbollah. In a statement, the IDF said the generals held an assessment and operational plans for an offensive in Lebanon were okayed. The announcement came amid repeated and ongoing attacks by Hezbollah and allied Palestinian terror groups in Lebanon on northern Israel. Israeli leaders have warned repeatedly it can no longer tolerate Hezbollah's presence along its border and has warned that should a diplomatic solution not be reached, it will turn to military action to push Hezbollah northward. Israeli air defenses shot down a suspected drone over the sea just off the coast of Gesher Haziv in northern Israel, close to Lebanon. The IDF also said that fighter jets struck Hezbollah targets in South Lebanon, including infrastructure and other terror targets. Hezbollah earlier released footage from what it said was one of its reconnaissance drones flying over northern Israel, including the Haifa port. It was unclear when the roughly 10 minutes of footage was taken, and the IDF has yet to comment. Foreign Minister Israel Katz warned, "We are very close to the moment when we will decide to change the rules of the game against Hezbollah and Lebanon. In a total war, Hezbollah will be destroyed and Lebanon will be hit hard." U.S. Envoy Amos Hochstein called for an urgent de-escalation of cross-border exchanges. The conflict, he said, between Israel and Hezbollah has gone on for long enough. It's in everyone's interest to resolve it quickly and diplomatically. That is both achievable and it is urgent.
Day 257 of the war in Gaza, the IDF infantry are deepening operations in Rafah and discovering dozens of terror tunnels. This as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken continues calls for a ceasefire and blames Hamas for the ongoing war. ILTV's Steve Leibowitz reports.
Secretary of State Blinken said the U.S. is still trying to bridge the gaps on Gaza ceasefire talks as Hamas continues to add new conditions to its approval to a proposed agreement.
Hamas has to make a decision. Is it actually looking out for the interests of Palestinian people? Is it looking out for its own interests at the expense of the interests of Palestinians who are suffering every single minute?
The top U.S. diplomat made clear that only Hamas was blocking a potential ceasefire.
Hamas came back with new conditions, new demands, including demands and conditions that actually went beyond what it had already previously accepted.
On the ground, the IDF offensive is continuing in Rafah. The infantry brigade of the 62nd Division is operating along the Egypt-Gaza border area and the key north-south Salah al-Din road. Givati is pushing deeper into Rafah, operating in neighborhoods where Hamas had built up its defenses and readying for an offensive in central Rafah. At the start of the operation, the IDF assessed that only 2,000 terror operatives remained in the city. An estimated 550 gunmen have been killed in Rafah, and the army said it has dismantled about half of the Hamas fighting force.
As the Rafah operation expands to take out Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and the northern front continues to escalate, here to speak with us about the next steps is Israeli journalist and talk radio host Josh Hasten. Josh, thank you so much for being with us today. I'd love to start by getting your take on this Rafah operation. To start, there was this humanitarian pause announced during the daytime, but the operation is also expanding to target the remaining terrorists. Will this pause actually hinder IDF activities or perhaps even prolong the operation?
Well, let's hope not. Let's hope that's not the case, because the IDF must dismantle the remaining 4 brigades there, the 4 battalions of Hamas. So again, the longer it goes, the worse off it is. This operation needs to take place as soon as possible, and the remaining Hamas brigades must be wiped out. Again, we saw the humanitarian aid pier which the United States built, spent $320 million on it, and now the pier is not even operational. The Biden administration must understand that Hamas must be taken out. Now, the focus has to be on not establishing these piers, these stopgaps, if you will, but going full force, allowing the IDF, helping the IDF go full force into Rafah and take out the remaining Hamas brigades. That is the only solution. That is the only way forward. Israel must dismantle Hamas completely, get back the hostages, and as the Prime Minister said, make sure that Gaza is no longer a threat to the state of Israel.
Now, on the diplomatic front, we've seen recent, fairly harsh criticism of Hamas by the U.S. administration, but the world still seems to be blaming Israel for not making a deal to release these hostages. Why do you think that there is such a skewed misrepresentation of the reality when it comes to even these hostage negotiations?
Yeah, as we saw, the support for Israel continues to wane, unfortunately, after October the 7th. But nevertheless, the good people of the world who understand that this is a battle between good and evil side with the state of Israel. And if you talk about the United States as represented by the members of Congress, their constituencies, the vast majority of the American people, they understand what's going on here. They understand the reality of the situation, that Hamas must be wiped out. And, how many deals were put on the table? Hamas is rejecting every single deal that Israel puts up right now. And that's the reality of it. So we saw the heroic rescue operation take place just over 2 weeks ago. And I really think that Israel must continue on a military path in order to get those hostages released. I don't think Hamas is willing to sign any sort of agreement. And of course, Israel doesn't want to have hundreds of terrorists released from our prisons. We've seen that before. We saw it in the Gilad Shalit deal. Unfortunately, all those, or the majority or a lot of those terrorists who were released went back to terrorism and even were involved in the October 7th massacre. So we cannot have a situation as badly as we want to bring the hostages home. There's no doubt about it. Every Israeli wants it. And the families are doing everything in their power to make sure that happens. But those who are not family members, direct family members, we have to understand and take the responsibility that we do not allow another group of terrorists released to keep continuing, perpetuating the violence against Israelis for generations to come. So Israel must be strong. We must go in. We must take out the terrorists and bring back the hostages like that.
Now, in northern Israel, we've seen tens of thousands of Israelis displaced as a result of this war for over 8 months. Now, we're discussing a potential operation in Lebanon. Is this the right move to get Israelis safely back in their homes in the north, or is it a potential disaster?
I don't know what other choices we have other than a full military operation in Lebanon. It's not something we want, just like we didn't want the operation in Gaza. It's not a war we chose. But you cannot have a situation where you have 80 to 100,000 Israelis out of their homes. It's already been 8 months, and that's 8 months too long. So Hezbollah is a much more serious threat than even Hamas. So they must be dealt with. And it looks like that militarily, that's the only way they're going to have to be dealt with. So Israel definitely will have to make some serious decisions as we move forward into the summer. But we cannot accept the reality on the ground. We cannot have rocket fire from Lebanon, which is taking place now on an hourly basis. Sometimes on a minute-to-minute basis, we have rocket fire from the north. Of course, we still have rocket fire from the south. So number one, we have to deal with the situation in Gaza. We have to eliminate the remaining battalions of Hamas, and then we're going to have to turn our attention to the north. And Hezbollah, of course, violating UN Resolution 1701 after the Second Lebanon War. It's absolutely unacceptable, and Israel should not be pressured into making any further concessions to Hezbollah. They are a brutal terrorist organization. They must be wiped out.
Following up on that, the U.S. administration is pressuring Israel already when it comes to Lebanon. We saw that Amos Hochstein came here to Israel to meet with the prime minister regarding a potential operation in Lebanon, calling for de-escalation. Do you think that in the event Israel does move forward with a military operation in Lebanon against Hezbollah, that there will be an even greater divide between the United States and Israel?
Listen, it's absolutely possible, but Hochstein was here before negotiating a deal with Lapid in terms of the gas reserves, and that was supposed to buy us peace and quiet. And at the end of the day, when you negotiate with terrorists, you don't get peace and quiet, you only get more war. And that's why we're in the situation we're in now. These are not people that can be dealt with in terms of negotiations. They have to be dealt with militarily. So again, the United States could be very, very upset about Israel moving forward when it comes to the situation in the north. But this is the one and only Jewish state. It's the only country we have. It's the only state we have. And we cannot accept the reality on the ground right now. Hezbollah has violated every UN resolution. Hezbollah has violated our northern border. We cannot accept that situation, even if it means going toe-to-toe with our best friends. And the United States is the best friends of Israel. We know that. That's undoubtedly true. But that being said, if Israel has to go at it alone, whether it's dealing with Iran, whether it's dealing with Hezbollah, then that's the case, and we have to move forward.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for your time, Josh.
Thanks so much.
Tensions running high between the United States and Prime Minister Netanyahu after his speech in which he claimed that the U.S. was withholding weapons from Israel. In response to the speech, the White House canceled a scheduled meeting with Netanyahu on Iran, which was set for Thursday. Let's take a closer look at the full story.
On Wednesday, the U.S. administration expressed outrage at Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu over his speech in which he claimed that the U.S. was withholding weapons from Israel in a time of war.
I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies.
The Biden administration denied the allegations and expressed outrage at the comments, so much so they canceled a scheduled strategic dialogue on Iran with Israeli officials, which was scheduled for Thursday. In response to the video, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre stated that only one shipment of weapons had been paused since the start of the war, and that there has been no other interruption. Top U.S. diplomat Amos Hochstein was in Israel in an effort to de-escalate tensions with Lebanon, but delivered the message to Netanyahu personally that the U.S. administration was outraged and found his speech completely unacceptable. The relations between Israeli leaders and the U.S. administration are more strained than ever following the incident. However, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan does still plan to meet Israeli counterpart Tzachi Hanegbi on the current threats.
And turning to some political news from Israel, the controversial so-called rabbis bill was pulled from the Knesset agenda by the prime minister at the last minute to avoid a scheduled vote and potential coalition revolt. The contentious law would allow the appointment of local rabbis by government authorities and was demanded by Shas, but strongly opposed by several Likud lawmakers. Following the prime minister's announcement, a Shas official warned that the collapse of Netanyahu's government is only a matter of time. The unnamed Shas official told Kan TV that there is no coalition, there is no discipline, and the most frustrating thing is that the Likud is a party made up of 35 separate factions. The bill aims to dramatically alter how municipal rabbis are chosen, taking power from the mayors and local councils and giving it to the government officials with potential jobs for Shas-affiliated rabbis. Shas leader Aryeh Deri is insisting that the coalition fulfill its agreement and pass the law. As there was a sharp rise in anti-Semitism in many U.S. universities since October 7th, a newly released report exposes Yale University's hidden ties to Qatari money. ILTV's Rachel Safdie has the full report.
A newly released report by the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy has exposed Yale University's failure to disclose millions in Qatari funding in violation of federal law. This report is part of the Follow the Money project, which has been exposing the funding of U.S. universities by foreign entities since 2012. Volume 1 of the report, which was released in 2023, unveiled the persistence of non-disclosure practices at several universities, including Yale, which prompted federal investigations in 2019. The new report release shows that from 2012 to 2023, Yale University reported receiving only around $280,000 from Qatar, while the actual amount is estimated to be at least close to $16 million. Universities are required to report all gifts from foreign sources that exceed $150,000, and this substantial underreporting raises concerns about the transparency of these universities. The report provides more evidence to prove Qatar's strategy in financing more American academic institutions as part of an effort to have greater influence and promote the interests of the Qatari regime. ISJAP Executive Director Dr. Charles Asher Small said, "Despite prior investigations and warnings, Yale and other universities continue to engage in practices that violate federal law. The persistent non-disclosure of substantial foreign funds, as well as contracts and agreements with foreign foundations and government agencies, not only undermines transparency and accountability, but also possess significant risk to the integrity of higher education." As demonstrated in ISJAP's previous research, anti-Semitic incidents are more prevalent on campuses receiving Qatari funding compared to universities that do not receive Qatari funds. Therefore, there is concern that the same is happening at Yale, which has seen a sharp rise in anti-Semitism on.
Well, for many years, best-selling Israeli author and photojournalist Lihi Lapid has been a voice for the voiceless in Israeli society. She's been a champion of women's rights, an advocate for disability rights, and since October 7th has been one of the most prominent voices raising awareness for our hostages who were kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th. Now her third novel, On Her Own, has just been released in English, telling the moving story of how love and support can grow even in the most unusual and difficult of circumstances. Here to speak with us in studio is Lihi Lapid. Lihi, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Gladly, gladly. I want to begin by talking about this book, On Her Own. What can you tell us about this story, and what is the message behind this book?
Wow, it's a story about a weird friendship between two strangers. A girl, 18-year-old, that runs away from home, and she hides in a stairwell in Tel Aviv, and at the middle of the night, an old woman is going down the stairs, looks at her, at Nina, this young woman. She looks at her and she says, Dana, you came back for me. She's not Dana, but she goes to live with Carmela. For me, the fact that it's in English now, it's really, really strong, because it was translated before 7th of October. But Carmela, the old woman, is a woman that lost her son in the army 30 years ago, and she still misses him. So for me, the fact that people will read it outside of Israel and realize that a soldier for us is a son and not just a war machine, so it's really emotional for me, the fact that
something even more relevant than perhaps initially expected when you translated it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I didn't expect it to be so relevant, and also it talks about the family of Carmela lives in America. She lives in Israel, and her son, startup nation, he goes to live in America with his kids. So this whole question of Israelis and Israelis in America and Jews in America and the whole relationship transatlantic, it's more relevant today than ever.
Absolutely. Now, you are a leading feminist voice in Israel. One of your other best-selling books, Women of Valor, focused on the true life stories of Israeli women overcoming incredible pressures in the state of Israel, including your experience raising a child with special needs. How has your life experience as a professional, as a mother, as the wife of a former prime minister, how has that impacted your writing and inspired you to speak about these issues?
I was a news photographer. I was a tough woman with short hair, motorbike, and when the kids were born, I realized that it's not so easy to do. This whole I can do anything better than you, and I discovered I'm a woman, and going from being this tough news photographer to be a mother. And I think I have this looking at motherhood in a different way. And when I realized Yael is autistic, and she's 27 years old now, but she doesn't speak. And she took me and Yair to a journey that is inside a family. And how do you keep the family strong? And how do you keep the family? I remember one day you said, this family needs to be happy again. And I was thinking, how can I do it when I'm so sad? So finding the strength, I think it's inside and outside, in the family and out there in the public arena.
Now, there's a recurring theme in a lot of your writings, and that is the resilience of the Israeli society, in particular, Israeli women, even in some of the most difficult situations, as you just spoke about. In a way, they're stories of hope in very dark times, as you mentioned, even more relevant today than perhaps when you initially wrote it. Has this resilience that we see from Israeli society, particularly women, impacted your writing and your professional career?
I think it does, because you know, I remember one day that I talked to someone abroad, and I said that when I went to the ultrasound and the doctor said, it's a boy, immediately I saw a soldier. Like, it's something, and you know, when we teach our kids, you need to be strong in front of your classmates because you are in the army in a moment. So yes, I think we are a bit tough here in Israel, and women are tough, but we have a long way to go. You know, when I hear about the tatzpitaniot, I don't know how you say it in English, that no one listened to them.
Yes.
And so I say we have a lot to do more in women's empowering here in Israel.
Absolutely. We are running out of time so quickly. I just wanted to shift gears a little bit to the hostages, because you've done so much incredible work raising awareness and supporting these families no matter what happens. What do you think can be done now to help bring them home?
I think there's a deal, and we need to take it. We just need to bring them back home. I'm talking as a mother. I see the mothers. I met them at the beginning, and time goes by, and they're thin as leaves. You know, when I come to hug, I hugged Lihi's mother, Lihi Lapid's mother, and I was afraid because she's so fragile already. And to know that your daughter is there with those horrible people, I think we are obliged to bring them back home, do anything we can.
Absolutely. Well, we are unfortunately out of time, but I want to thank you for everything that you're doing, and also, of course, encourage all of our viewers to purchase On Our Own. It is available now in English. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
In a historic discovery, archaeologists have found proof of the last Jewish resistance against Roman rule in Lud. ILTV's Rachel Safdie has the full report.
In a magnificent discovery, archaeologists found the remainders of a public building that was used by Jews during Roman rule. An excavation led by the Israel Antiquities Authority and funded by the Lod municipality uncovered a public building from the late Roman, early Byzantine period that suffered violent destruction.
לא ציפינו לדבר כזה, אפילו לא בלוד. לראשונה בחפירה של רשות העתיקות ובמימון החברה הכלכלית לוד נחשפה עדות ארכיאולוגית למרד גלוס. לפי המקורות ההיסטוריים, עם דיכוי המרד, גלוס וחייליו מגיעים לערים היהודיות ושורפים אותם והורסים אותם על היסודות.
Under the building, 94 silver and bronze coins were found dating between 221 to 354 CE, which were deliberately placed there as an emergency stash in the hopes of returning to collect them when the situation would calm. Archaeologist Shachar Christine explained Lod's importance for the Jews after the destruction of the temple.
העיר לוד הייתה עיר חשובה מאוד ליהודים, במיוחד לאחר חורבן הבית בשנת 70. יהודים רבים מעבירים את מושבם לכאן, ופועלים כאן חכמים רבים, ביניהם רבי טרפון, רבן גמליאל, רבי אליעזר בן אורקנוס.
The Jews of Lod, who hid coins in the floor of that public building in the hopes they would return to it, certainly would not expect that those who would find it some 1,700 years later would be archaeologists from the Israel Antiquities Authority.
Let's take a look at the weather forecast. Mostly clear skies are expected tonight around the country, with temperatures setting at lows of about 22 degrees Celsius or 73 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, heat is expected to pick up and reach highs of 35 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees Fahrenheit, together with partly cloudy skies and humid conditions. That's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all your devices, check out our ILTV channels, subscribe to our ILTV newsletter, and don't forget to check out our new and improved website, ILTV.tv, with all the latest news from the heart of the State of Israel. I'm Emily Schrader. Be well, and thank you for watching.